prevents you from being able to act on something. And I fought with myself all those years saying, you know, well, we've got this great battle, I feel so strongly, I want to do more. And even though I felt this desire to do more, I just was not able to fulfill it. And once I started watching documentaries about antidepressants in the long terms, and they say, oh, you shouldn't use it for more than a year. Well, I was on it for 5 years, and no doctor was willing to take me off, so with a lot of research on my own, and 2 years of reducing the dose slowly, I did get off, and I'm very grateful for it, because now I can actually act on what I feel passionately about. So.
And this kind of plays into something, too, because you know there's 27 million Americans on antidepressants. I was shocked to read that in the paper like 2 weeks ago. That's 1/10 of all America, and you know, that's 27 million. And then I thought to myself, well, you know what? That could answer a question that's been nagging me. Why does no one protest the war in Iraq and Afghanistan anymore? Like I remember going out in 2001. I've been out in several since, but as time goes by, the war goes on, and nobody says anything. No letters, and yet most of the country allegedly is still against this war, as it always has been. Like it's always been 45 to 55% of the country's against it. Where are these people? And then I thought, is it those 27 million are all on antidepressants? They just can't be bothered? Is that what's happened? Because this would never have happened. I'm influenced by the 60s. To me, the greatest era ever on the planet was the 1960s. Everything you heard that was good is true, and anything you heard that was bad was good too. So there was a lot of sex and drugs, and there was incredible dissent, underground newspapers everywhere. There was a newspaper everywhere for every possible occasion. There were wild political rallies. That's when we first got the women's liberation movement. That's when we got the homosexual movement, the environmental movement. All the great movements that we think about today started in a very 10-year period from 1963. The civil rights movement, everything, 63 to 73 was the greatest period in modern history. For any kind of political dissent, for opening your eyes, for being aware, for being able to experiment, and to be socially acceptable. It was socially acceptable in those days to be dissenting. All the best television of the modern era came from that period. All in the Family, MASH, the Jeffersons, the racial boundaries were broken, gender boundaries were broken. It all happened in that 10-year period. And the war against drugs is all a battle to repeal all that. Stephen Harper is very specific, by the way. When he launched his drug war in 2007 in the National Drug Study, he said we need to reverse this culture of the 1960s. He was very specific. It all starts when he says his son's been asking what these Sgt. Pepper lyrics mean. Of all things, his son Brian, or Ben, I think his son Benjamin, Stephen Harper's son Ben, asked his dad, what does Lucy in the Sky, what is the benefit of Mr. Kite? Right, and asking all these questions about Sgt. Pepper. And that's when Stephen Harper said he wanted to curtail this permissive generation that's emerged from the 1960s.
He said, I'm not going to put my albums away.
Yeah, so now he's playing. I have a little help from my friends. What a guy. What a hypocrisy to go on. But here's a guy, himself willing to celebrate the 60s, take it vainly, and use it and exploit it, and yet tell his son that those are bad lyrics and there should be. And it's 40 years later, 40 years since Woodstock, and he still is fighting the culture wars. And that's because the 60s was the greatest cultural period on the history of this earth, I believe. I believe it. We had more about peace in that period than any other time. We had more about self-awareness. We had more about recognizing black people and immigrant people and minority people and gender and feminism and civil rights than any other time. And it kind of all ended abruptly with disco. You know? that was a very good archetypal change too. We went from music about awareness, about revolution, about peace, about war, about feminism, about equality, about civil rights. We went from that to let's just all dance and forget about it and take quaaludes. And so we were kind of in a metaphorical quaalude use for about 35 years since then. And that's what you're up against. Whenever you meet anyone with a war on drugs, they're still trying to purge the 1960s. They're still trying to get the people who believe in that ethos of one love and one race, one group of people, one planet. Yes?
You talk a lot about how we ended up with prohibition, and one thing that I didn't see a lot of in the movie we're talking about today is the impetus behind the pharmaceutical companies on this prohibition. We talked about how incarceration has become a big business, but how much of what can we say about the pharmaceutical companies and how they profit by prohibition?
They need people to suffer and be in pain constantly so they can continue to.
Well, everybody in jail is on pharmaceuticals too, that's for sure. When they, I remember in my first experience in jail when they called up meds and everybody but me lined up. And I went to one guy and said, what are they all getting? And he looked at me really intense and whatever they can get. Whatever they can get. And no kidding, they got pills for sleeping, for being mellow, for boredom, for whatever it is they needed. They could go up and ask and get a pharmaceutical. And you know, one of the worst things that happened to peace was the advent of the income tax. Because when the income tax came in, governments could afford war that they could never afford before. Because the income tax is an unending pit of money that they can simply raise taxes. Every other form of taxation was very limited and finite. And when taxes get too high, people avoid them by going around taxes. So there was never the kind of colossal ability to finance a war like World War I before the income tax, or World War II, or the war on drugs. If the war on drugs truly has used up $1 trillion. You can only do that with certain government policies like the income tax that allow it. And so government policy